Oh, howdy y'all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Welcome to day 2 of Teaser Season, patch 0.3.0, the third Edict. Today, we got a very short lore teaser that actually has a lot of information in it for those of you that know a lot about Path of Exile 1's lore. I'm going to assume that's not most of you because a lot of the Path of Exile 1 lore is scattered throughout a whole bunch of different places, and perhaps most frustratingly, a fair amount of it has actually been removed from the game. Two mechanics have had a lot of lore in Path of Exile 1 that have since been removed. The first one was Synthesis. That one won't be too important for today, but the second one is much more important, and that is the scarabs that existed prior to patch 3.24. Now, for the benefit of those of you that are not Path of Exile 1 players, scarabs in Path of Exile 1 are mapping consumables. And what they do is they add additional mods to a map, but they do so in a deterministic way. In that sense, they're probably closer to towers in Path of Exile 2 than anything else. But instead of the game deciding, all right, 7 of the next 13 maps that you run are going to be augmented with this additional buff, and also with you having the ability to roll them, scarabs have fixed effects, and you can deterministically apply them to a given map just by putting them into the map device. There's a limit to the number of scarabs that you can use, and that's one of the things that comes up a lot in Path of Exile 1 in terms of just ways that people engage with the endgame. So they're a mechanic that doesn't have a comparison in Path of Exile 2 at the moment, but for this video, the most important thing is not actually what scarabs do, it's the flavor text that's on them, or particularly the flavor text that used to be on them prior to a major rework. However, scarabs received a very substantial overhaul in patch 3.24 Necropolis League in Path of Exile 1, and a whole bunch of the old flavor text was removed from the game. Alongside this was a whole bunch of lore about characters such as Akheli, and also the Order of the Jinn in general. The Order of the Jinn are still in Path of Exile 1, but a fair amount of their lore has since been removed. Now, why does all of this matter? Well, this single screenshot, I think, is enough for those of you that are familiar with Path of Exile 1 to recognize this is the color scheme of the Abyss monsters. This is strongly hinting that our League mechanic in 0.3.0 might be a reskin of Path of Exile 1's Abyss. However, it also could be very, very different to what exists in POE 1, and part of the reason for that is the name Kulemak is dropped here. Kulemak is a figure in the lore of Path of Exile 1 that we don't have a huge amount of interaction with so far. In Path of Exile 1, there is an entire mechanic called Betrayal that revolves around trying to control the fallout after an incredibly powerful artifact called the Horns of Kulemak are stolen. We also have a couple of other items, such as the Cane of Kulemak in Path of Exile 1, but not much is known about the monster itself, and it's entirely possible, given that Grinding Gear Games went out of their way to call this the Kulemak teaser, even though there is nothing about it that indicates Kulemak in the entire video, and this potentially indicates that the name Kulemak is intended as a major teaser as well. An interesting thing that comes out of this is that it solves a mystery that came out last week. Grinding Gear Games posted this Krangle text as an image somewhere, and the reason I didn't think that this tied to the Abyss mechanic and instead explored other possibilities such as Harbingers was because the Abyssal Liches are more bestial, and I didn't think that they'd have a written language. Well, it turns out they do have a written language. And the reason we know that is because Grinding Gear Games decided to hide on the thumbnail of this video something that uses the same Krangle text. So this indicates that everything that is on this letter is also tied to the same mechanics that we see in this video, which, because of this color scheme, is almost certain to be an adaptation of Path of Exile 1's Abyss mechanic, and also, because the mentions of Kulemak are made, this also provides a link between Kulemak and the Abyss. Now, if you're interested in checking out some of that text that's no longer in Path of Exile 1, I will put a link to it down in the description below. This is the Order of the Jinn page on the Path of Exile 1 wiki, and also to this page on the Lightless, which is a civilization that the Abyss monsters themselves had. This includes information upon their leadership, Amanamu, Ulaman, Kurgle, and potentially more, and it looks like Kulemak is potentially one of these as well now. On top of that, there's also a couple of open questions Path of Exile 1 doesn't answer, such as, who was Tecrod? Tecrod was definitely a figure associated with the Lightless. There's a unique jewel that's tied to Tecrod in Path of Exile 1, but as for more information than that, we just don't really know. Another significant figure that comes up when you're talking about the Lightless in Path of Exile 1's lore is Akheli the Clayshaper. Akheli was not from the Lightless. Akheli was from the previous civilization. Those of you that play Path of Exile 1 might have encountered All the Crystal King. All the Crystal King was from the proto-civilization, as even their name has disappeared over time in Rayclast. Akheli was a figure from this proto-civilization, and she wound up being the person who warned the Maraketh that the abyssal monsters were stirring and that they were going to sweep across the world. Akheli then fought alongside the Maraketh, and the Maraketh are the civilization that we explore in Act 2 of Path of Exile 2. She fought alongside the Maraketh and was one of the characters that was central to the Maraketh being able to survive during the period where the abyssal monsters were absolutely dominant on Rayclast. During this period, two particular heroes among the Maraketh stood out, and they would ascend to godhood and become Solaris and Lunaris. And then, when Path of Exile 1's events come along, the player character in that goes on a murderous rampage throughout the entire Pantheon, and Solaris and Lunaris are cut down, along with all of the other gods. And this is some of the story background that is hidden within Path of Exile 1. But if you want a deeper dive than that into the lore, the person that I would recommend checking out is a content creator called KittenCatNoodle. She knows a lot more about Path of Exile 1's lore than I do. I would say she's probably the preeminent expert on it outside of grinding your games. And so if you have a look at some of her videos, you get a sense of just how expansive the lore is, and also just how little is known about certain topics. Ultimately, it's fascinating just how much information you can take out of little snippets of lore that are hidden all over the place. Whether it be from this video Grinding Your Games put out, where the combination of the thumbnail and just really any single shot later in the video can indicate a whole bunch of linkages together that can give quite a sense as to what to expect in the third edict in 0.3.0, but also just the whole lore delivery mechanic that's used throughout Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2 both. Lore isn't really shoved in your face, it's not made super obvious, it's there if you're interested in looking for it, but there's also a number of pieces of lore that are very, very hard to find, and even harder to recognize the relevance of. Something I've actually noticed become more popular in other genres than games in recent years, particularly in epic fantasy and going back as far back as the 90s, is that there's a common idea that a lot of places have where you provide information about lore multiple times. The first time you do it really subtly so that only the superfans notice. Then the second time it's a little bit more clear. Then the third or the fourth time it's screamed from the rooftops. This seems to be the lore delivery mechanic that Grinding Your Games use, but because we tend to be a little bit more of a cohesive community than a lot of book fandoms are, you end up with a situation where someone figures it out first, lets other people know about it, and that's the way discovery tends to happen. You tend to discover more about the lore from the Path of Exile subreddit or from KittenCatNoodle videos than you do from playing the game yourself. Is that better or worse than discovering it other ways? I don't really think it matters. I think there's a space for both Expedition 33 style storytelling and also Path of Exile style storytelling in gaming. Anyways, that's a whole bunch of asides. A quick summary of what we learnt today. Path of Exile 2's 030 Third Edict expansion is going to feature Kulemak in some way, a figure from the lore. It's likely to be tied to the Abyss mechanic in some way, and I'm speculating that this is going to be the League mechanic, so Abyss will join mechanics such as Breach, but may only exist in the new economy that's being created for 030 on day one, and then eventually it'll go core in a slightly changed form. Of course, could be wrong about some of these things, but I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results.